morning and welcome to Consultant and Talk Live. My name is Russell Pearson, and this show or this segment is all about answering your questions as a consultant who runs a business. It is morning for me, which is why the lights are bright outside and why this is not alcohol, but actually cold brew coffee. And no matter where you are in the world, cheers to you. And I hope that you are having a fantastic week. Today, we want to talk about a question that's come in. And if you're ever looking to add a question to this segment, you can go to consultingquestions.com, put in your question there, and I will answer them live. And so a question came in today, and I will bring it on screen so you can all see what it says. It says, what software do you use for data visualization when creating dashboards for your clients? And then a second part to that question, would it depend on the size or type of client? All right, well, interesting question. And I completely understand why you would ask that question. But you specifically asked me that question, so I'll answer it specifically from my point of view. So I do dashboards for clients these days. Yes, there was definitely a time when I did it, but now clients tend to do dashboards for me, right? Because I don't want my clients, because I'm working to enable my clients to achieve certain outcomes. I want to make sure that my clients have access to those live dashboards where possible, as often as possible. Now, I will talk about what I used to do, and I will talk about the specific software that I do use for visualizations in general, and maybe some presentations. But when it comes to dashboards in particular, I think we're in 2025 now. There is almost no reason why we can't have up-to-date dashboards, and especially if we've got some form of integrated systems. Now, there are some clients who haven't yet put those systems in place, and for those clients, they may need to create a manual dashboard. But even with those clients, I want them to have the awareness of the information that goes into a dashboard, and I want them to have the awareness of the outputs that are coming out of that dashboard. And so really, for me, the preference is, what is the client going to actually find most valuable or most useful for them in the running of their business? Now, I'm a business consultant. And so for other consultants who maybe are working with different people in different scenarios, you might need to, they might be using your dashboard because they're not running a business. They don't have all this software in place, and they're not going to do that. And so then it does tend to, these days, come down to your own CRM or your own platform, wherever you're actually hosting your clients. That software will have its own visualization elements as well. Now, over time, I have got a little lazy on one side, and then I've actually got more practical on the other. So lazy on one side is more around I tend to tell people about the things that are going on in the world. Now, that's only one modality, which is the auditory. So through the voice, through to the ears. If you're just telling somebody something as a consultant, you're missing out on all sorts of different ways to communicate. Now, so you've got auditory, kinesthetic, so the feeling and touching and doing side of things, and then you've got the visual. And so it does make sense as a consultant when you're communicating, because you are a professional communicator at the end of the day, is that you want to make sure that you are communicating the most effective way. So just telling people stuff, and that's where I'm talking about the lazy side of things, just telling people stuff doesn't tend to cut it, because there's only a small amount of people where they will take that information in effectively. And so I always then try and get the kinesthetic side in play, which means that they're doing things that are actually, they're engaging with the information. And finally, with the visualization of it, you've seen probably on the podcast and other training that I might have done, I use a whiteboard a lot. Now, I don't have the whiteboard behind me today, but this pen, this is a magic pen. and all these magic markers that I have are incredibly useful, because let's say that you're doing a presentation in front of a client in a boardroom or whatever it might be, and the slides are up on a screen, and everyone's looking to the screen, and they're going, the screen has the answers. And so that's what ends up happening, whether it's on a big slide presentation in a workshop, or it's a monitor. The monitor is the expert, and everyone's looking to the monitor to see, does the monitor have the answers? The cool thing about using a pen and visualizing this way is that I have the answers, because through me, the answers are being created. Right? And so sometimes I will use a pen and a whiteboard to visualize graphs, pie charts, all sorts of different things to give people a sense of things. All we're doing at the end of the day is we're communicating. Now, to your second point in the question, and I will get to the specific software that I do use. But the second point of the question is, does it matter on the size of the client? It doesn't matter on the size of the client, but are there multiple stakeholders who are not going to be in the meeting? So take the idea of communicate. If we're communicating with a client who's there in front of us, do we need to be doing presentations? Do we need to be doing dashboards and all those things? Well, who knows? There's all sorts of reasons to use dashboards. But if we're doing a presentation where part of the stakeholder group, so maybe the main client is there in front of you, but they're going to have to communicate your communication to someone else, then it does 100% make sense to be visualizing data. And we visualize data to ensure that the message doesn't change on the way through. It's just like the I'm not sure I'm allowed to say Chinese whispers these days, but it's like the old-fashioned Chinese whispers where you say one thing and then it changes and it changes and it changes. And by the time you get to the last stakeholder, they've got a very different message than the one that you started with. So the only space that it really changes is when there's multiple stakeholders that need to be communicated to. Is there a need to have visualization of data for credibility? I don't think so. I mean, once upon a time I did. I was like, oh, I've got to make these beautiful graphs and create this data so that people, there's evidence that what I'm saying is true. But it's fascinating once you have like a certain level of confidence about your expertise, your ability to help people and get people results. The confidence you have removes the need for any of that stuff. And so you rarely need to have the same level or depth of data to back up the things that you're saying once you've actually got a person who trusts you, right? And a lot of that trust comes from a trust in yourself, right? So if you're not trusting yourself, you're not 100% sure, or you want to rely on the data rather than rely on yourself, then it's going to come through, all right? That's part of the process, is becoming skilled, becoming knowledgeable, and then putting that in practice to win enough times that you get become quite confident. So confidence is not a thing where I just shake you and say be confident. There is a process to it. So it doesn't really depend on the size of the company or the client, but it does depend on the amount of stakeholders. So a bigger company will tend to have more stakeholders who are not in any particular meeting. Now, if I do need to communicate that way, there are a couple of tools that I definitely do use. One of those tools is, because I have a background in design, that I've always used the Adobe suite of visual tools. So Photoshop, Illustrator, and Illustrator is the one I use for creating data visualization. Is it the best tool for the job? Probably not. Does it allow me to be completely to do anything I want and be completely manual in that? Manual can sometimes get a bad name, but the ability for me to change the look and adjust any element of it gives me complete control to do that. Whereas a lot of dashboarding software has one look or maybe a couple of different templated looks, and that's basically all you can work with. Whereas when I do it, I can make my dashboard look like the theme of the client. I can not just use a color scheme, but that's one idea. You can use a color scheme of the client, but I can use their font structures. I can use certain. I can even use certain brand devices like arrows and dots and shapes and things like that as part of the visualization of their data, which changes the presentation, makes it far more relevant. Right, so I use the Adobe suite, but there are things like Canva, and Canva in particular is getting incredible. Its ability to use artificial intelligence to take your data and bring it into some form of communication presentation, whether it be a document or a presentation or a slide of some sort, is getting fantastic. There are a lot of others out there, and if you're using some sort of project management software, then being able to visualize through that project management software is another one. There's a new piece of AI project management that I'm looking to work with, and hopefully those guys will have that available to show and share soon, because I would like to let the cat out of the bag, so to speak. And that has certain elements that of visualization that you can bring into the presentations as well. But at the end of the day, it's what data needs to be communicated, and is visual the best way to communicate that? And for many people, it is. And so whether you use graphs, whether you use infographics, they are good ways of creating memory triggers. So we communicate not just so that we can have information shared, we communicate so we can have information be recalled, and we do the recall devices to enable that to happen. And they tend to be, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic recall modalities that enable us to remember things. Right, memory is not just about taking information in; it's about being able to recall it as well. So. There are so many different things now. On the presentation side, a lot of people are still using PowerPoint. There are some cool things that PowerPoint can do if you really get under the hood and start to understand it. If you're not using YouTube to learn how to do some of these more fascinating visualization techniques, you definitely need to. YouTube itself, and I know this is on YouTube, but this is not an ad for YouTube. YouTube is the best. Not only website, but education tool that has been around for, I think, more than the last 10 years. But I think it's 25 years. What was it? 20, that's been 2005 or something like that. So that's 20 years that YouTube's been around. And I've been using it heavily the entire time. And being able to search specifically for what you want, and then for people out there for free, just like the put that information up there for you to access. Fantastic. And not only having one person just doing one thing, because you just get one point of view, you've got all these different people from different points of view, so you can watch even on a technical subject like software to create a presentation. You can look at 3 different people talk about the one piece of software and show you 3 different points of view and perspectives on it. So if you're not using YouTube to at least understand the softwares that you've got, I think you should definitely be doing that, because a lot of the software now has these capacities, whether it's CRM software, whether it's project management software, whether it's just simple document creation software like Canva or the Adobe Suite. And then I use Keynote because I'm a Mac guy, right? So I've been using Macs since I started in business because I came from that design background, and I've just continued to use them. So I know I pay a little bit extra for it, but I do like the way that a Mac, its responsiveness. There's a certain responsiveness I get from these computers. So what software do I use for data visualization? The Adobe Suite, so Illustrator and Photoshop. I use Keynote to present whenever I need to. Ideally, I want to avoid any of that where possible. I'll sometimes say to a client who we want to talk about some data, I will get them to create the data. And there's a really good reason. That's not the being lazy part. That is enabling them to actually get the data, be able to get the data so they can get it in the future, and then be able to understand the data as they're visualizing it. Like, there's a really incredibly useful exercise to not do that work for clients. Now, I understand clients can be really busy and sometimes they'll avoid doing those things, but that's part of the reason that they're in the problem that they're in, is because they are too busy and they're not focused on the specific things that they need to do. I run the Forge business program, and I run the Consulting Guild. And in both of those places, we have consultants who are doing incredibly well, and we have consultants who are struggling along. And the ones that are struggling along are doing more things than they should. Right? They're finding all these new opportunities to distract them on what they should be doing. And the ones that are shooting the lights out, the ones that are growing and doubling their business and preparing it for exit and doing all those things, are very clear about what is the one simple constraint that they should be focusing on. And they just attack it. And so the point that I'm making in a roundabout way is, if you are presenting dashboards for your clients, there are some symptomatic issues in that. Number one, if you're having to do it because they want you to do it, then you're an employee. All right. So you've got the wrong position. You're not consulting to them. You're not giving them counsel. If they need the data to believe you, then you haven't done the work in a communication or rapport building capacity to actually build that trust. You want to be building that trust. It's a core part of being able to consult with someone, is that they actually trust what you're saying. Because if they're not trusting what you're saying, then they're not going to act on what you're saying, which means they're not going to do the things to get the outcomes. And then finally, if you're doing all the work for them, creating all the data, coming up with the solutions, there's no ownership there for them. And if there's no ownership there for them, they're not going to act on those things again, and they're not going to implement them in their businesses or their lives, however you consult. And so there are some symptomatic issues with doing presentations for client. There are some symptomatic issues with creating dashboards for clients. I sometimes fall into those traps. Like I find myself every now and then like catering to a client, and then when I do it, I just think to myself, I've messed up because I have taken responsibility for their situation away from them. And by taking responsibility away from them, you're actually disabling them, which is not a way to help effectively consult to a client to get outcomes. If you've got more questions, I'd love to receive them. Andreas put this one in. Really appreciate it, Andreas. Thank you very much for that. But more questions like this, I want to talk about them. I want to have people jump on live and ask questions as well. I'm going to put it into the chat, https:// consultingquestions.com. You can go there, leave a question, and I'll read it out on the show. And I don't. If you don't want me to say your name, you can literally put that in as part of the question. Don't say my name, and I'll leave it out. But if you want me to say your name, absolutely, you put the name there, and I'll let you know when these things get live. Until next time, my name is Russell Pearson. If you haven't already, go to russellpearsonprograms.com. Download the free resource we've got there available. Stay passionate, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye for now.